There's something Padre Pio confessed in his final days that no parent should ignore. And if your daughter has uttered these three specific words, you need to listen right now. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't theory. It's not superstition. It's a direct warning from one of the most powerful saints of the 20th century. A man who possessed the gift of reading souls. A mystic who could see what others couldn't. And he saw something in our times that deeply disturbed him. Padre Pio spent decades hearing confessions from thousands. He heard secrets that would break hearts. He witnessed evils that would freeze your blood. But there was something specific about the children of this age that kept him awake night after night. Something he called the silent invasion. Imagine for a moment you're a saint with the gift of seeing directly into the human soul. You can perceive the presence of evil like others perceive the heat of a fire. And for years, decade after decade, you begin to notice a pattern repeating itself in the children who come to you, a pattern telling you that the enemy has found a new gateway. Padre Pio documented this in private letters, sealed for decades. Letters only made public when the Church felt the world was ready for this truth, or perhaps when it was too late for many families. Because what Padre Pio discovered was this: the devil doesn't come shouting. He doesn't arrive with horns and flames. He doesn't announce himself with loud music or obvious symbols. He comes whispering. He comes as a familiar little voice. He comes through words that sound normal but carry an invisible weight. And the three words that most worried Padre Pio were words any girl might say on any afternoon, while playing in her room or watching television. Words you might have heard from your own daughter's lips without realizing what they truly revealed. Before revealing these words, you need to understand something fundamental about a child's mind. Padre Pio explained it this way: a child's soul is like pure water in a crystal glass. Everything added changes the color, and the enemy knows this. Children don't have the spiritual defenses we adults develop. They haven't built those walls of experience and discernment that protect us. Their innocence, their greatest blessing, can also become their greatest vulnerability. And in this era, that vulnerability is being exploited in ways Padre Pio saw before anyone else. He described how certain influences could plant seeds of confusion in a child's mind. Seeds that grow slowly, silently, until one day parents wake up and no longer recognize their own child. It's as if something else is speaking through them, Padre Pio said. Something that uses their voice but doesn't come from their heart. And those three specific words were the clearest signs that this something had found its way inside. The first word Padre Pio identified was one he constantly heard in the confessions of desperate parents. A word girls began using with alarming frequency, especially after age 7, a word that seemed innocent on the surface but carried a burden of rebellion unnatural in a child. That word was hate. But don't be mistaken. This isn't the natural hate a child might express when frustrated or angry. Padre Pio spoke of something different. He spoke of when a young girl uses the word hate with a coldness that doesn't match her age. When she says it, looking you directly in the eye, without tears, without emotion. When she says it like it's a cold, calculated statement. I hate God. I hate prayer. I hate going to church. Padre Pio observed that when children use this word with that specific coldness, something else is directing their emotions, something planting a seed of separation between the child and the sacred. Because true hatred requires an emotional sophistication young children simply don't possess naturally. It requires a capacity for prolonged resentment that's unnatural in childlike innocence. When Padre Pio heard this word uttered with that particular coldness, he immediately began specific prayers of protection, because he knew that family was under a very particular kind of attack. The The second word was even more subtle, more dangerous because it sounded completely normal. It was a word any parent might hear without alarm because it's part of a child's normal vocabulary. That word was alone. I want to be alone. I like being alone. I prefer to be alone. No. Again, Padre Pio wasn't referring to a child's normal desire for time to play or reflect. He referred to something deeper and more disturbing. He referred to when a girl begins to compulsively seek isolation, when she begins to reject family companionship, not out of shyness or a normal phase of growth, but because something is teaching her to prefer solitude. Padre Pio understood that isolation was one of the enemy's primary strategies. Divide and conquer, he said. To separate a child from the warmth of family is to separate them from the natural protection God designed. When a young girl began to obsessively insist on being alone, especially in her room with the door closed, Padre Pio knew something was cultivating that separation, something that needed privacy to continue its work. Parents who came to him described the same pattern. Their daughters, once sociable and affectionate, suddenly began to reject hugs, avoid family conversations, and constantly seek excuses to be alone. It's as if something is teaching them to distrust family love, Padre Pio observed, as if something is whispering to them that family is the enemy and that only in solitude can they find their true selves. And that transformation from a natural desire for connection to an unnatural isolation was one of the clearest signs of negative spiritual interference. But the third word was the one that alarmed Padre Pio the most. It was a word that, when he heard it from the lips of a young girl, immediately put him on high alert. A word that indicated that the negative influence had not only entered, but had begun to establish permanent residence. That word was mine. Not the normal mine of a child learning about possession and boundaries. Padre Pio referred to the word mine, pronounced with a possessive intensity that transcended normal childhood psychology. My room is mine. My body is mine. My life is mine. Pronounced not with the innocence of a child discovering their autonomy, but with a fierceness that seemed to come from something more mature, more calculated. Padre Pio had observed that when this word appeared with that particular intensity, it was generally accompanied by other alarming behavioral changes. Girls who uttered mine with that unnatural intensity began to show extreme resistance to any form of spiritual authority. Not just normal disobedience, but an almost physical revulsion toward prayer, blessings, or any mention of divine protection. It was as if something inside them was aggressively defending its newly conquered territory. When I hear that word pronounced like that, confessed Padre Pio, I know I'm no longer speaking entirely with the child. There's something else there, something claiming possession. And that was the word that worried him most, because it indicated the influence had progressed from occasional visitor to permanent resident. But here's the most important thing Padre Pio wanted parents to understand. These words are not a final sentence. They are not an irreversible condemnation. They are an early warning. They are an opportunity to recognize that something is happening before it progresses to more severe stages. They are a mercy from God that allows parents to intervene spiritually when intervention can still be relatively simple and completely effective. Padre Pio meticulously developed what he called the protocol of the 3 words, a specific, tested, and highly effective system of spiritual response that parents could implement as soon as they recognized these signs in their daughters. Because he understood with deep compassion that most parents aren't mystical saints with supernatural gifts of spiritual discernment. They are normal people, with normal jobs, with normal lives, who deeply love their children and need practical, concrete, and effective tools to protect them spiritually. Tools that any parent could implement immediately, without needing years of advanced spiritual training. The protocol began with something he considered absolutely fundamental, which he called recognition without panic. If you hear these words come out of your daughter's mouth with the characteristics I've described, Padre Pio instructed with admirable pastoral precision, the first and most important thing is that you do not panic emotionally. Don't shout in alarm. Don't accuse your daughter of being possessed or evil. Don't dramatize the situation in a way that frightens or confuses her. Panic, he explained, only made the situation worse. The parent's fear became additional fuel for any negative influence that might be present. Instead, he recommended what he called silent strengthening of the family environment. This meant gradually increasing the presence of the sacred in the home without making a spectacle of it. More family prayers, but presented as a loving tradition, not a spiritual emergency. More quality family time, more meaningful conversations. More activities that strengthen the bond between parents and children. Authentic family love, said Padre Pio, is the most powerful force against any negative influence. But it must be true love, not anxious or desperate love. He also recommended what he called invisible blessings, blessing the water the girl drank without her knowing, blessing her room while she was at school, blessing her clothes, her books, her toys. Create an atmosphere of protection so saturated with grace, he instructed, that any negative influence feels uncomfortable remaining there. But perhaps the most important aspect of Padre Pio's protocol was what he called loving vigilance. This meant paying more attention to the girl's behavior patterns, but from a place of protective love, not paranoid suspicion. What is she watching on television? Who is she talking to? What kind of content is she consuming online or through friends? Padre Pio had observed that these three words rarely appeared in a vacuum. There was usually an external source of influence feeding them. Find the door through which the influence entered, he said, and you can close it. Sometimes it was inappropriate content in the media. Sometimes it was friendships that introduced ideas too advanced for the girl's age. Sometimes it was even adults in positions of trust, planting seeds of confusion or rebellion. The goal wasn't to isolate the girl from the world, but to identify and eliminate the specific influences causing these abnormal behavioral changes. Padre Pio also emphasized the importance of what he called gradual restoration of trust. Many times when these words appeared, it was because something had damaged the girl's natural trust in parental or spiritual authority. A child who completely trusts in their parents' love, he explained, has natural protection against most negative influences. But when that trust is broken, doors open that should remain closed. Restoring that trust required patience, consistency, and above all, the practical demonstration that the parents truly had the girl's best interests at heart. It wasn't about being permissive or avoiding all discipline. It was about ensuring that every interaction strengthened the girl's sense of security and love, instead of feeding feelings of misunderstanding or resentment. But Padre Pio also warned about something he considered crucial: time. These influences, he said, are like seeds that grow. The longer they are allowed to develop without interference, the deeper their roots become. It wasn't that the situation was hopeless if detected late, but it did mean that restoration would require more time, more patience, and more spiritual dedication. A small tree can be easily transplanted, he explained. A large tree requires heavy machinery. That's why the importance of recognizing these three words as the early warnings they are, and responding immediately with wisdom and love. There's something more Padre Pio wanted parents to understand about this specific time in history. something that differentiated it from all previous generations. Padre Pio saw something deeply troubling in the children of his time, something that continues to resonate with unsettling clarity today. He saw children exposed to levels of stimulation and confusion completely unprecedented in human history. Never before, he observed, have children had access to so much information, so many voices, so many influences, all at once. And many of those voices do not have their best interests at heart. This information overload, this relentless barrage of stimuli, Padre Pio believed, created a special vulnerability in children. Their young minds, he explained, simply weren't equipped to process and filter so many contradictory influences simultaneously. It's like placing a toddler in the middle of a screaming mob, he would say, and expecting them to hear their mother's voice. Technically possible, but it requires a level of concentration and discernment beyond their natural capabilities. And in that confusion, in that constant noise, other voices, more manipulative, more persistent voices, could find their way into a child's consciousness. Voices that knew exactly how to speak to a child's developing ego. Voices that could make rebellion sound like growth, separation sound like independence, the rejection of loving authority sound like authenticity. It was within this context that Padre Pio saw three words appearing with alarming frequency. These weren't just normal phases of childhood development, they were symptoms of an overloaded system, a young mind bombarded with more influences than it could healthily manage. And this realization led Padre Pio to develop what he considered the most important strategy for parents of this age: the creation of what he called oases of simplicity. These oases weren't necessarily physical places, although they could include physical spaces. They were periods of time, routines, activities where a child's mind could rest, could escape the constant bombardment of external stimuli. Imagine, Padre Pio would say, that your daughter is a delicate plant, constantly battered by strong winds. No matter how strong the plant, eventually it will bend or break. But if you give it regular shelter from the wind, it can grow strong and resilient. Oases of simplicity were that shelter. Padre Pio specifically recommended that every family create at least 3 types of daily oases. The first was what he called sacred quiet time. Not necessarily formal prayer, although it could include prayer. It was simply time where the family was together, without devices, without television, without external noise. Time where the only voices a child heard were the voices of those who truly loved them. In that silence, Padre Pio explained, the voice of God can be heard again, and when a child can hear that voice, the other voices lose their power. This time could be as simple as a device-free family dinner, a walk in nature, or even household chores done together in contemplative silence. The important thing wasn't the specific activity, but the quality of the silence and the loving presence of the family. The second type of oasis was what Padre Pio called earth-connecting activities. Activities that connected the child to God's physical creation in a tangible way. Gardening, cooking from scratch, working with their hands, anything that required full physical presence and produced something real and tangible. When a child works with their hands to create something beautiful, Padre Pio observed, they are imitating God the Creator. And in that imitation, they find their true identity as a child of God. These activities also had the added benefit of being naturally meditative. It's difficult to maintain obsessive negative thoughts while kneading bread or planting seeds. The third type of oasis was the most important according to Padre Pio: moments of personal affirmation. These were moments where parents intentionally affirmed a child's true identity as a beloved daughter or son of God, in direct contrast to any negative messages they might be receiving from other sources. My love for you never changes. You are precious exactly as you are. God has beautiful plans for your life. Your family is your safe harbor, forever. But Padre Pio emphasized that these affirmations had to be genuine, not desperate. They had to come from a place of trust in God's love, not from fear of losing the child. A child can detect the difference, he said, between confident love and anxious love. Anxious love scares them. Confident love reassures them. There was something else Padre Pio considered crucial for families who had detected these three dangerous words, something he called the invisible protection factor. This factor had to do with the level of spiritual life of the parents themselves. You can't give what you don't have, he explained. If parents don't have a strong and authentic connection with God, they can't create an environment of effective spiritual protection for their children. This didn't mean parents had to be perfect saints, but it did mean they had to take their own spiritual lives seriously as the foundation of family protection. Padre Pio specifically recommended that parents who had detected these warning signs intensify three personal spiritual practices. The first was daily prayer for specific protection for each child by name, not generic prayer, but detailed prayer that addressed the specific vulnerabilities each child was showing. God knows your daughter better than you do, Padre Pio said. But when you pray specifically for her, you are giving him permission to intervene in more direct ways. The second practice was what he called strategic fasting. Fasting one meal a week specifically for the spiritual protection of their children. Fasting, he explained, is like declaring spiritual warfare. It tells the kingdom of darkness that you are willing to sacrifice yourself personally for your child's freedom. The third practice was regular confession and active sacramental life. When parents live in a state of grace, Padre Pio observed, the whole house benefits from that grace. It's like having a spiritual purification system constantly running in the home. But perhaps the most important thing Padre Pio wanted parents to understand was this: the appearance of these three words was not a parental failure. I've seen holy parents whose children have gone through these trials, he confessed, and I've seen imperfect parents whose children have been miraculously protected. Divine protection doesn't always work the way we expect. Sometimes, he explained, God allows these trials precisely because he trusts that the parents have the spiritual strength to guide their children through them. Consider the possibility, Padre Pio would say, that God has chosen your family for this specific battle because he knows you can win it. That perspective completely changed the parents' emotional response. Instead of feeling like victims or failures, they could see themselves as spiritual warriors chosen for an important mission. And that difference in perspective permeated the entire family dynamic. There were specific cases Padre Pio documented where families had implemented these protocols and had seen dramatic transformations in their daughters. The case that impacted him most was that of an Italian family, where the 8-year-old daughter had begun using the three words with alarming intensity. The parents implemented the oases of simplicity, intensified their personal spiritual lives, and applied the recognition without panic. Instead of directly confronting the girl about the words, they simply increased the presence of love and protection in the family environment. After 3 months, the girl herself approached her mother and said, "Mom, I don't like being alone in my room anymore. Can I help you in the kitchen?" That was the first sign that something had changed. The word alone had lost its power over her. A month later, during family prayer, the girl spontaneously said, "I like it when we pray together. The word hate had been replaced by its opposite. And finally, when her younger brother wanted to use one of her toys, instead of yelling, "It's mine," she said, "We can share it." The transformation was complete, but Padre Pio emphasized that it had required three crucial elements: time, consistency, and faith. "It's not magic," he explained. "It's like healing a wound. It requires time. The correct treatment applied consistently, and faith that healing is possible." But he also documented cases where families had not been able to implement these protocols effectively, and the consequences had been more severe. In those cases, the three words had evolved into more problematic behaviors. Hate had become extreme rebellion. Alone had become total isolation. Mine had become destructive selfishness. These cases confirmed to Padre Pio that the three words truly were early indicators. Ignoring them or responding inadequately had predictable and severe consequences. There was something else Padre Pio had observed specifically about this modern era, something that made the situation both more dangerous and more hopeful than in previous generations. The most dangerous aspect was the speed. Negative influences could spread and deepen much more rapidly than before. Due to technology and constant connectivity, in my time, he reflected, a bad influence came from one person at a time, in one place at a time. Now it can come from 1,000 sources simultaneously, 24 hours a day. But the most hopeful aspect was that parents who truly dedicated themselves to the spiritual protection of their families had access to resources and support communities that previous generations never had. "It has never been easier to find other parents who understand these battles," he observed. "It has never been easier to access profound spiritual teachings. It has never been easier to create networks of community protection." This was Padre Pio's final vision for families of this era, not to struggle alone, but to form communities of families who mutually protected each other spiritually. "When several families unite in prayer and mutual support," he said, "they create a spiritual fortress that is almost impossible to penetrate." He specifically recommended that families who had detected these warning signs seek out other families with similar values and form spiritual support groups. These groups could be as simple as families meeting regularly to pray together, or as organized as groups coordinating spiritual protection activities for all their children. "When children see that their parents are not alone in these values," he explained, "it is much easier for them to accept and embrace those values as well." But perhaps the deepest teaching Padre Pio left on this subject was this: the three dangerous words were not the real problem. They were symptoms of a deeper problem, the loss of the sense of sacred belonging. When a child knows deep in their being that they belong to God, that they belong to a family that loves them, that they belong to a community that values them, he explained, those words lose all their power. Hate cannot take root in a heart that feels deeply loved. The desire to be alone cannot dominate someone who experiences authentic connection regularly. Possessive mine cannot control someone who experiences an abundance of love and security. Therefore, Padre Pio's final strategy was not just to defend against negative influences, but to saturate the child's life with positive experiences of sacred belonging. "It's not enough to eliminate bad influences," he said. "You have to fill that space with something better. And the best is the tangible experience of God's unconditional love expressed through family love." This is why Padre Pio insisted that the protocols had to be primarily positive, not restrictive. Instead of simply prohibiting things, parents had to offer more attractive alternatives. Instead of simply criticizing bad influences, they had to create experiences so rich and satisfying that bad influences seemed boring in comparison. A child who is truly in love with their family life, he observed, is not going to be easily seduced by voices that promise something better elsewhere. At the end of his reflections on this topic, Padre Pio left a specific prayer that he recommended to all families who had heard these three dangerous words. A prayer that should be prayed daily by both parents, preferably together until the transformation was complete. Lord Jesus, you know our daughter better than we do. You love her more than we could ever love her. We ask that you surround her mind, her heart, and her soul with your protection. Close any door that has been opened to influences that do not come from you. Fill every space of her being with your light, your peace, and your love. Help us as parents to be worthy instruments of your grace in her life. And if it is your will, use us to guide other families facing these same trials. We ask this through your Sacred Heart, a heart that has never turned away, a parent seeking protection for their children. Amen. Padre Pio believed this prayer, offered with authentic faith and accompanied by the right actions, held a special protective power. I have seen miracles, he confessed, in families who have persevered in this prayer with true devotion. But he also warned that prayer without action was incomplete, just as action without prayer was insufficient. God expects us to do our part, he said, and our part is to create the environment where his miracles can manifest. This is the final legacy Padre Pio left concerning the three dangerous words. They are not a sentence, but an opportunity to deepen the family's spiritual life, an opportunity to forge stronger bonds between parents and children, an opportunity to experience God's protective power in a tangible way. And for those parents who have heard these words from their daughters' lips, Padre Pio had a final message of hope. No matter how dark the situation seems now, no matter how far away your daughter feels, God's love is stronger than any negative influence. Your love as a parent is a direct channel of that divine love. And when those two loves unite in persistent prayer and action, there is no force on earth or in hell that can resist. That is the promise. That is the hope. And that is why Padre Pio considered his confession about the three dangerous words not a warning of despair, but a call to spiritual victory. Because in the end, it's not about the words our daughters say, it's about the words we, as parents, choose to believe about their future. And Padre Pio firmly believed that when parents choose to believe in the power of divine love over the power of any negative influence, that faith becomes the force that transforms the entire family reality. This is the ultimate truth he wanted all parents to know. You have more power than you believe. Your love is stronger than you imagine, and God is closer than you feel. The three words are only the beginning of the story. The ending is written by you, in union with the love that never fails. And that ending can always be a story of victory, restoration, and triumphant love.